done that. But it was a lot of fun, though, you know. And he said, the next night, bring your car. And so the next night, I bought my car, paid the $5 parking, saw Pearl Jam with Joey, and then after the show, we hung out with Eddie for a couple of hours. And I got to tell you, Eddie Vedder is one of the nicest people you ever meet in your whole life. And he was so kind to Joey, so kind to John, and just not like a rock star, just like a regular guy. And I remember him giving Joey a huge hug at the end of it. And I went out and got my car and drove it down the ramp. And they opened up the big sliding door. We drove it into the place. Joey got into the car there where there were no fans, no people, no danger. And I drove him back to his hotel, which was a whole lot safer, but a whole lot less interesting. You know, I remember the meeting with Johnny and Eddie Vedder, you know, when they met, and Joey was kind of jealous. Joey, you know, because John was a big Republican. He was a conservative. Eddie was a liberal, but yet Johnny and Eddie got along really, really well because John was a conservative, but he wanted to hear other people's point of view. And I think maybe sometimes in today's discourse, that's what we're losing is the different sides don't want to hear any other people's point of view. But Johnny and Eddie could talk about politics sanely and talk about their points of view. But in Joey's mind, it made no sense to Joey. Why is Eddie Vedder becoming friends with John, this conservative? And I remember him saying that to me. You know, why is he spending time with Eddie Vedder? You know, why is Eddie spending time with John? But Eddie and John became really good friends, and they talked on the phone. John would tell me, you know, Eddie's my best friend. And they would talk on the phone every single day. And Eddie would call and ask him for advice. And I would call John quite a bit and ask him for advice because he would be like a big brother or like a father. And he seemed to know the answer to everything. He seemed to always give great advice. But when they moved out to Los Angeles, and I was telling you this before, Flo, they Johnny and his wife had a special rule. If one of Johnny's friends got to spend the night in their house, then one of Linda's friends got to spend the night in their house. And neither one of them wanted to entertain the other one's friend. The only person that could spend the night that was friends with both of them was Vincent Gallo, who did Buffalo 66. He's a pretty famous fella. He was the only one. So when Eddie Vedder, you know, huge rock star, would come down with his wife from Seattle, they would have to spend the night in Joey's pool house, which is this tiny little cabana, basically outside, no air conditioning, and they would sleep on the benches, because if Eddie Vedder got to stay in Johnny's house, and they had spare bedrooms. They had tons of spare bedrooms. But if he did that, then Linda got to invite one of her friends, and Johnny was not about to have that. So John would tell me stories of how Eddie would jump from the top of the cabana and do flips off into the swimming pool, and how they would just have a wonderful time. And when I went to visit John in Los Angeles, several different times, you know, we would go out to eat and things like that. But John had this red Cadillac, but it wasn't like like an old style Cadillac. It was a new Cadillac, like you see maybe some older people driving. And Johnny and I were driving down Sunset, and he goes, Rick, a friend of mine said, John, this car, it's not very punk of you. It's, not very punk of you. And I said, well, what'd you say to him, John? And he said, I told him it's punk because I do it. So John had that feeling that he had accomplished all that he had wanted to accomplish. He had made his mark. Yes, they didn't have any, number one hits or anything like that, but they had made their mark. But I still don't think in 96 or 99 or 2001, I don't think they realized how big a mark they would have even now. I mean, they're bigger now. They've been retired for 20 years, and there are people now that, still wear their shirts that weren't even old enough to see them when they were still playing. And that was one of the things, I know you feel the same way, is for so many years, you could pretty much see the Ramones whenever you wanted to. They were, you could see just a most amazing concert. They would come to your city. I remember going to see them in Baltimore at Hammerjacks. They would go to Hammerjacks in Baltimore, Maryland every 6 months. They would sell the place out, and you could count on them being back there. And you started to rely on them. And I remember May 1st, 1995, they were in Raleigh. And I went to visit them at their hotel, and Joey was swimming laps. If you can imagine, Joey Ramone swimming laps in a pool. It was a strange sight. And he was swimming laps. John was at the bar, and he said, well, we've decided we're going to retire. And I think they had an argument. Joey, when he wouldn't get his way, sometimes would say, okay, that's it, I'm quitting. And then they'd say, no, don't quit, you can have your way. But John, I think for the past couple years, had been seeing that the end was near. He would always tell me, I don't want to be one of those old guys up on stage. I want to quit when we're still great. And so there was one time in April, they were arguing over something. It may have been what to release as the next single. It may have been, who knows. And Joey said, if I don't get my way, I'm quitting. And John said, all right, that's it. We're retiring. And it was the first time John had said that. And when John draws his line in the sand, John draws his line in the sand. And that was it. And so they played another year. They did, they went back to the places that they wanted to go back to, and they did the things at Coney Island High that you talked about. They did Lollapalooza. Then they did that last show in Los Angeles. But I was there. I may not have been there for the very day, but that was at the time when they told, when they decided that they were gonna quit. And it was really a shock. Joey had cancer at that point, but it was under control. They could have played for a few more years. But John had already moved out to LA, and he would tell me that he wanted to retire, but he had to have enough money. I got to make sure that I have enough. And I remember saying, well, John, how much is enough? And he would say, it's enough, just enough. He wouldn't tell, I don't know if he had 2 million, 3 million, I don't know what he had. But we would talk about stocks a lot. John was into mutual funds, but he invested well. And Joey was more of a stock person. The song he did about Maria Bartiromo, what's happening with Amazon, what's happening with AOL. After he retired, that was his life. He watched Squawk Box every day. And I remember him telling me in 1999 or 2000, he told me in 2000, he said, I made $500,000 in the market last year, trading internet stocks. And I'm kind of glad, I'm not glad that Joey passed away. I wish that he was still here, but I'm glad that he didn't have to see that downturn, and I'm glad he didn't have to see 9/11. but he gave us, I remember riding home from somewhere in the van with them, and my seat was in the one behind Joey. Joey would stretch out all the way, and his feet would be kind of hunched up, because he was still too big for the van. And I had the seat behind him. And I remember him telling me, he's giving me stock advice. This was 95, August of 95, and he said, my broker says Microsoft and Intel are going to be real big because, in 5 years, everybody's going to have a computer. And I didn't buy the Intel or the Microsoft. I wish I had. But he did give my wife a nice stock tip with Amazon back in 98. So we did buy a little bit of Amazon. But it was interesting to see the different hobbies that those guys had. They were punk rockers, and you and I live for the Ramones, and we collect the Ramones, and we love them. Joey loved the stock market. Johnny loved baseball. Marky loved cars. And CJ had his things too. I was friends with CJ, and I still am. He's the one I talk to the most. But during the Ramones tenure, we were the same age. He was CJ. He was a super nice guy. He let me stay in his hotel rooms several times. We had a lot of great adventures, but I never really saw his hobbies like I did with the other guys. I think their highlight of the night was after the show, they all got to go to 7-Eleven or the pantry or whatever that convenience store was. Marky would pick up a car magazine, Johnny would pick up this and that, a bottle of Yoo-Hoo, Joey would get some things. It was kind of their highlight to mess around in the convenience store and grab this and that before they went back to the hotel. And you think about rock and roll being so glamorous, but it's just that hour or two that's glamorous. The other parts of it are getting up, going downstairs, driving to the next place, dealing with the band, going to sound check, listening to the opening band. And Johnny hated the opening bands. He would complain because you'd be sitting in the backstage area and you just hear this thumping, thump, 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 thump. And he would be like, oh my God, I hate that. I wish that they would finish. Why aren't they done yet? And then when they would say, are you ready for the Ramones? And everybody would shout. John would be like, look, they're using our name to get applause. Why are they doing that? And just that kind of stuff. And it was so funny to see their backstage antics. Like Marky would always, he would always take a nap before the show. And he would he would get his head up under the counter and his feet would be outside the counter and he would sleep. And Johnny would take ice cubes and put them right up next to the edge of the counter and put a little bottle right up next to it and let it drip, let it melt, and it would melt on Mark. And Mark would it would happen 5 minutes, and then Mark would wake up and he'd say, what are you doing? And push that away. And they just had a lot of hijinks that they did to each other. Like they would, I think John sometimes would tell Mark that they were checking out of the hotel. And Mark would be like, well, no, we're staying for 2 more days. And John was like, no, we're checking out. You need to pack your stuff and be down at 12:30 when they were leaving at 1. And so John would get down at 1 and Joey would be down there and Mark would have packed his bags and have checked out. And Monty would say, what are you doing, Mark? We're staying here for 2 more days. And Mark would be like, John told me to check out. And they would just do stuff like that. I think that they would do things to irritate each other on the road. They became like big brothers, or not big brothers, but brothers to each other, where they would fight, but they were brothers, and they would tease each other, and they would. But it was all in good. It was all in good fun. I didn't see Joey and John talk to each other quite that often. sometimes they did. I think Mark would talk to Joey, Mark would talk to CJ, John would talk to CJ, John would talk to Mark. Joey and Monty hung out a lot. Like they would go eat. I remember going to eat with them at a couple of fish camps, and they loved to stop at Burger King. And Joey loved like it's called the Big Fish or something like that, and they loved to stop at Cracker Barrel because Cracker Barrel had a policy that if a traveling band was coming through and gave them an autographed picture, the traveling band got to eat for free. And as soon as the Ramones heard that, they found every Cracker Barrel that they could possibly find, because all they had to do was to give them an 8x10, sign it, and they all ate for free. And so they would go for Cracker Barrels all the time. What's ironic, though, is that those signed photos now are worth so much more than the food that the Ramones ate. If the employees of Cracker Barrel actually kept those things, I don't know if they did or not. Let me see what else I got. How are we doing on time, Flo? Okay, well, good.